I never thought that the trip to see my family would end up in the worst humiliation of my life. I reached the airport, hands full, one small suitcase, my usual bag, and a carefully wrapped apple pie. I had been preparing for that trip for weeks. Caroline had told me this year would be special, that the children wanted to see me. I believed it. How could I not believe her? I'm her mother. The clock read 8 o'clock when I arrived at the arrivals area, my heart heavy with excitement. I dialed her number, 1, 2, 3 times. On the fourth, she replied, "Oh, sorry, Mom. We're already sitting at the table. It's the traffic, the kids, you know. You can come back flying. Yes, Merry Christmas." And she hung up, as if telling me she forgot the bread. There was no excuse, no space, no family. I stood there alone, with my bag hanging from my shoulder and the steamed-up Tupperware from the heat. Other passengers met with hugs, laughter, and signs of welcome. I only had the cold of the windows and the distant hum of flight announcements. They didn't forget me. They left me out on purpose. I don't know how long I stood there, long enough for a TSA agent to approach, asking if I needed help. I told him I didn't, a lie. I needed something more than help. I needed to understand how my only daughter could abandon me on a day like that, knowing I had left everything for her for years. The agent left, and I walked to an airport cafeteria. I sat in a hard chair in front of a coffee I didn't drink and dialed again. This time, she didn't answer. I thought about when Caroline had pneumonia, and I slept sitting in her hospital room. I thought about the years I worked double shifts as a nurse to pay for her career. I thought about her wedding, how I covered the catering when the budget wasn't enough. I thought of everything while the automatic voice said she wasn't available. I felt old, yes, but more than that, I felt invisible, as if I no longer counted, as if my time to be part of her life had expired. But between the shame and the silence, something else began to ignite in me, a small but firm fire. People think at our age we no longer have strength, can't make decisions, that we depend, that we're finished. But I didn't stay sitting there forever. And when I returned home, I didn't return with empty hands. I came back with a plan. I sat alone in that airport cafeteria, surrounded by families laughing, children shouting for cookies, and employees barely concealing their fatigue. In front of me was a lukewarm coffee I didn't touch. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from something deeper, the trembling of a betrayal I didn't see coming. A woman, maybe my age, approached and offered me a couple of handkerchiefs. She had a warm, non-judgmental look. She just said, "Whatever is happening, you don't deserve it." I nodded gratefully, but said nothing. I couldn't. If I opened my mouth, my soul would have overflowed. It had been more than 40 years supporting my daughter in every way. When Ben, her husband, lost his first job, who paid for the children's school? Me. When Caroline was depressed after her second birth, who moved into her house for a year to help? Me. And now, this is how she repaid me. I didn't cry much. I'm not one to get lost in public. I limit myself, I hold back. But that night, it hurt to breathe. I took out my cell phone and searched for return flights. The next one was leaving in 3 hours. I booked it without thinking, not another call, not a message. She knew what she did. It wasn't an oversight, it was a decision. I stood up, adjusted my scarf, and picked up the apple pie. I took it to the garbage dump, not out of spite, simply because I no longer had anyone to give it to. Then something curious happened. While walking toward the boarding gate, with that knot still tied in my throat, I felt something else, freedom. Not the good kind, not the desired kind, but the kind that comes when one realizes they no longer owe anything. Caroline didn't leave me hanging by accident. She left me because it was no longer convenient for me to be there, because perhaps her life of appearances couldn't bear an elderly mother who didn't fit in the perfect Instagram photo. And what other choice did I have? Beg for a seat at the table? No, that's over. I reserved my flight. I sat down to wait, and while the clock ticked, I knew one thing. I wasn't going to tell her anything. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to complain. I was going to leave her with silence, a silence that weighs more than any reproach. And when the plane took off that night, I swore I would never be her ATM disguised as a mother again. I arrived home around noon after the longest flight of my life, not because of the hours, but because of the weight on my chest. Outside, Boston wore its usual gray December. Inside, the silence was so deep that even my steps seemed strange. I left my suitcase in the hallway and went straight to the dining room shelf. There was, as every year for 12 years, the box of memories I keep for Christmas. I opened it with slow hands. I took out last year's card. Thanks for everything, Mom. I don't know what we would do without you, Caroline. She didn't even sign with love, just that cold, correct. I put it in a cardboard box labeled with a simple Caroline. I sat on the couch, the one that still smells like the dry band, and opened my cell phone. I checked our last messages. They were all logistical. What time are you arriving? Did you bring the kids' things? Don't forget the receipts. No one said, I love you, or how are you, Mom? Then I saw the calls the last 5 times she answered in a hurry. There was always something urgent, always children screaming in the background or an I'll call you later that never happened. I stood there, watching that history as someone reviewing the autopsy of a relationship, and I understood. This didn't start at the airport. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't a slip. It was a custom, a routine of slow exclusion, like humidity rising through the walls without you noticing until it's too late. I took a deep breath and got up. I went to the kitchen and opened the pantry. There was my jar of chamomile tea with the label I wrote years ago in permanent marker, to sleep peacefully. I boiled it, served it in my chipped blue mug, and sat at the table, smoothing the tablecloth I embroidered years ago with my initials. I thought of Lily and Max, my grandchildren. Would they know I wasn't coming? Caroline might have said I was sick, busy, dead perhaps, or simply taught them, as she was taught before, that mothers are useful while they serve and discarded when they're in the way. I don't know. And for the first time, I tried to justify it, because it was time to stop looking for excuses for those who don't seek forgiveness. We sat in the kitchen, as we did every Friday, 2 cups of tea and our favorite oatmeal cookies, the ones she bakes when life is tough, as they say. I told Elian about the airport. I didn't go into details. I didn't want her pity. I just needed someone to know it hurt. Elian, without scolding me, listened in silence. Then she put down her cup with a sigh and said, My cousin went through the same thing. Her daughter was cutting her off little by little. First, she stopped calling, then only saw her at Christmas, and in the end, told her she could no longer help with the rent. And do you know what my cousin did? I looked at her, not knowing if I wanted to know. She turned off the tap. Just like that. I'm not paying your rent anymore, she told her. That word hit me like a slammed door. Rent. I stared at my cup, the hand-painted blue flower slowly spinning at the bottom. Ellen, I said, almost in a whisper, I've been paying Caroline's mortgage for 7 years. Her little spoon froze in the air. What? Yes. Since Ben lost his job, they told me it was temporary, just until they stabilized. Each month, I make a transfer from George's trust forfeiture account, my late husband, straight to the bank. She looked at me as if I had confessed a crime. And you still do it? I nodded, not out of pride, but out of inertia. Because one gets used to giving, because in some corner of the soul, we believe if we keep helping, they won't leave us behind. Evely, darling, listen to me carefully, she said, taking my hand. They don't need you, they use you. The words fell like ice water, but they didn't hurt. They felt true. Why do I keep paying? I asked myself more than her. Out of fear, out of habit, out of love? Elena shrugged. Sometimes we do it for all those things, but you've given enough. I got up in silence. I went to the shelf and took the blue folder where I keep the trust documents, the same one George made me promise to take care of. For the first time in years, I opened it not to use it, but to close it. 2 days later, I sat in front of my trusted banker. A young man with a rehearsed smile and polite manners offered me coffee, but I declined. My heart was full, my stomach closed. I placed the blue folder on the table, the trust document. His gaze changed instantly, more serious, more careful. Would you like to make a withdrawal, Mrs. Langley? No, I just want to check who has access. He typed on his computer. The screen reflected a greenish light over his glasses. Your daughter, Caroline Turner, has full access as a secondary beneficiary. You established automatic deposits to cover a mortgage in the name of your son-in-law, Ben Turner. I nodded. He didn't ask more questions, and I appreciated that. And if I wanted to pause everything, we could temporarily freeze the activity related to that account. Technically, you can revoke access at any time. The word revoke floated like a knife wrapped in velvet. Not yet, I said. My fingers smoothed the edge of my scarf, like caressing a burning memory. I just want you to watch the movements, to notify me before each dollar goes out, but don't tell her anything. He nodded professionally. He didn't ask why. I guess in his line of work, one learns to read between the lines. Then we'll mark the account for confidential review. You'll receive alerts and have final approval, but your daughter will not be notified. It took me a second to answer. That second was the space where I stopped being a helpful mother and started being a woman who protects herself. Perfect, I said without hesitation. When I left the bank, Boston was still just as gray, but something inside me had shifted. It wasn't revenge, it was prevention, the seed of a peace that didn't depend on anyone else. I passed the neighborhood flower shop and bought a small bouquet of yellow tulips. I don't know why, maybe because tulips don't explain themselves, they bloom like me. That night, I prepared my chamomile, smoothed the dining table cloth, and placed the tulips in the center. As I sipped the tea, I smiled for the first time since the airport. I said nothing, made no scene, didn't slam the door, but the bolt was already turning from within. Daniel's office smelled the same as when I went with George to sign insurance papers and wills, that aroma of waxed wood and old folders that made me feel safe, as if the world had clear rules. Daniel is one of those men who don't talk much, but when they do, it carries weight. He greeted me with a soft smile and a look that saw me whole, not a confused old lady, but Evelyn Langley, the woman who carried her family forward when no one else could. I placed the blue folder in front of him. I want to change this, I said without trembling. He opened the document, read, and checked. Sometimes he mumbled dates, other times he nodded. Then he looked up. Caroline has access through a secondary clause. Technically, you are still the owner and administrator. You may revoke, transfer, or restructure everything. It doesn't need her authorization. And what would you recommend? To restructure the trust is your right and duty if you feel your will is no longer respected. Evelyn, you don't owe anyone your tranquility, much less those who don't value it. I stayed silent, not from doubt, but because those words were like balm. I needed to hear them from someone who knew it's not just about papers, but broken loyalties. We can do this without her knowing for now. Yes, we'll make the changes as preparations. Until you sign the final version, no notification will be sent. But, he said, looking firmly, once you sign, that's it. No ambiguities. I nodded. There was something in that "that's it" that sounded like relief. He gave me a list, a sheet with clear handwriting, redefine beneficiaries of the trust, suspend automatic transfers, notify property mortgage as yours, determine date of full responsibility for Caroline. I took the sheet like picking up a lost compass. I had it clear. It was no longer a mother's favor, it was a rectification of dignity. Before leaving, Daniel said, George would be proud of you. He always said you were the sensible one in the family. I smiled. Inside, I broke a little, but I didn't let it show. I kept the sheet in my bag next to a handkerchief embroidered by my sister Helen when I turned 50. That night, I slept peacefully not because everything was resolved, but because I had stopped acting as if my well-being depended on others. It was early, the first week of December. The air smelled of firewood and false promises. I put on my gray coat, the one with the loose button I always forgot to sew, and walked to the post office. In my pocket, I had a Christmas card, not one overloaded with golden reindeer, but a simple one with a sprig of mistletoe on the cover and plenty of room inside. I wrote it that morning between sips of chamomile, with firm handwriting, I hope you had a nice Christmas. I flew back without any problems. Nothing more. Not a single word of reproach, nor money, nor checks, nor the usual $100 bill I used to hide among the pages. This time, only silence wrapped in cardboard. I walked the 2 blocks to the post office with that mixture of calm and strength felt only when one does something with full conviction. I affixed the seal, wrote her address in round letters, like someone with nothing to hide, and placed it in the mailbox. My fingers trembled, but not from fear. It was something else, clarity. On the way home, I stopped by the yarn store, bought a blue spool to sew the coat's button, and a new marker for my spice jars, not out of need, but for something deeper. A decision to take care of myself, as if organizing my things would also organize my heart. When I arrived, I found a bank notification. Caroline had made another transfer, but this time it wasn't processed. It was under review, as I had asked. I looked at it and, without thinking much, forwarded the email to Daniel. Subject: just so you're aware. No more explanations, no more justifications. I kept the card she sent last year, the one with a thanks for all written like someone signing a receipt, in the box that now carries her name. Not with anger, but with sad peace, the same peace as when one accepts that something broke long ago and is only now seen in new light. That night, I lit a candle next to the window, the same window where I watched it snow with Caroline when she was a child. I sat there, watching the wind move the branches, and in that silence, I understood that sometimes love isn't lost suddenly. It slips away, erased with each forgetting, each contempt. But I also learned something else. I wasn't going to let them erase me without fighting for myself. 3 days after sending the card, my cell phone vibrated with a notification. A new voicemail from Caroline. She didn't call directly. She left a message, trying to sound casual, but I could feel the discomfort in her throat. I played the audio once. Hello, Mom. Hey, nothing serious. I just noticed something weird with the account. It seems there was a bank error. One of the payments wasn't processed. Could you call? I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. Thanks. Kisses. Those kisses tasted like expired sugar. I listened carefully. Her tone was the one she used as a child when she broke something expensive and tried not to let me notice, sweet, cloying, falsely innocent. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the audio to Daniel without comment. Minutes later, his reply arrived. Let her notice. She'll soon realize this isn't a misunderstanding. I leaned back in the living room armchair and noticed the reliquary on the fireplace, the one George gave us on our 20th anniversary. Inside was a photo of Caroline with braids and overflowing laughter, from when she drew pictures with crayons and said I was her heroine. I wondered where that girl had been lost, at what moment I replaced her with this woman who only knows how to love what's convenient. I knew then I might never know. But I understood one thing. Her call wasn't worry, it was panic disguised. She knew the money was on pause. She felt it, needed it, and her first impulse was to fix it without facing anything. It didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how little it hurt to ignore her, because the most broken part of me used to dream she'd call just to say, I love you, Mom. But that day never came, and I finally let that dream go. The next day, I prepared a stew for myself. I set the table complete, as if expecting a visitor, not for pretense, but for dignity. I poured a glass of wine, the good one, saved for special occasions, and toasted to myself for enduring so much and for not doing it anymore, I said in a low voice. I went out to the patio that morning with pruning shears in hand, the ones George gave me years ago when we promised we'd have flowers all year in old age. Of course, he left early, and I was left alone with his roses and silences. There was a rebellious vine growing uncontrollably for months, and I don't know why, but that day I felt I had to cut it. It wasn't just a plant, it was a metaphor, though I didn't put it into words then. While I cut branch by branch, unasked memories came. Caroline at 10, hanging from my apron. Caroline on her first day of high school, nervous. Caroline the night before her wedding, crying and saying, "Thank you for everything, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I did both, silent tears, the kind that don't need a scene but hurt the same, because part of me still loved her. I loved her as only a mother can, even when she shouldn't. But love doesn't mean letting yourself be dragged down. Love isn't becoming a shadow. I sat on the bench next to the rosebush, where I took pictures with Lily on her 5th birthday. There, with hands stained with earth and a soul in turmoil, I felt the temptation to dial her number just to hear her voice, to ask why. But I didn't, because it was no longer about her, it was about me. I understood that if I kept calling, it wasn't for peace, it was because I didn't know how to be alone. And after everything, that wasn't fair to me. The sun fell among the dry leaves, gilding everything with December melancholy. I felt a cold breeze and wrapped myself in my favorite blanket, hand-knitted by Helen. That blanket has seen births, funerals, fevered nights, and days of glory. I put it on like a shield, and there, between pruned roses and silent tears, I made peace with myself, not with Caroline. That will take time, if it ever comes. But with myself, yes, because I was no longer just a wounded mother. I was a woman who had loved without measure and finally learned to love herself too. It was the end of December. All of Boston seemed wrapped in ice and farewells. I entered Daniel's office with my thicker coat and my decision firmer. He received me without unnecessary words, just offered a seat and took out the documents we'd prepared weeks ago. They were ready, impeccable, tidy. "Are you sure, Evely?" "I'm alive." And that's enough to be sure. I took the pen and signed once, twice, 3 times in clear handwriting with a firm hand and a calm heart. That day, my pulse didn't tremble. Daniel read the most important change aloud. As of March 1st, Caroline Tarner will have to take over full property payments. In failure to do so, the property reverts to the name of the original trust administrator, Evely Langley. I read that phrase like someone saying goodbye to an older version of herself. Because I paid for that house every month, every penny, while they lived as if it were a gift from heaven, not knowing the sky had a name and surname. Daniel handed me an envelope with a formal, cold, legal, unquestionable notification. "This document informs you that, per the terms of the George Langley Trust, you have 60 days to assume full financial responsibility for the aforementioned mortgage. If payments are not met, the property will revert to the control of the legal administrator. We'll send it after New Year, as agreed," Daniel said. I nodded, stood, picked up my bag and blue folder. It no longer weighed anything, it was just paper. The real weight, the emotional one, stayed on the table. Before I left, Daniel looked at me with a mix of respect and tenderness only true friends show. George would be smiling so much now. I didn't say anything, just pressed my lips with that knot that was no longer pain, it was closure. That night, I came home and made lentil soup. I turned on the radio with soft Christmas carols and set the table with my embroidered tablecloth. In the center, the reliquary. Next to it, a lit candle. I poured a glass of wine, the 3rd of the month. I toasted alone, yes, but not solitary. To justice, to the silence that builds, to recovering myself, I whispered. Because this time, the one who left a letter on the table was me. The morning of January 2nd dawned white, as if the sky itself wanted to cover what was to come. I put on my winter boots, the thick-soled ones George hated because he said they made me look like an explorer. And I went out. I had the envelope in my coat's inside pocket. I hadn't sealed it yet. I'd read it 5 times, as if part of me needed to ensure it wasn't an impulse. But there was no doubt, it was a decision. I walked the 2 blocks to the nearest mailbox. The wind hit my face like soft slaps, but I kept going not out of pride, but out of peace. When I arrived, I took the envelope from my coat, sealed it carefully, and wrote the address in slow handwriting, her address, the house I paid for in silence, the one with her name on the papers, but mine on every bill. I placed it in the mailbox and heard it fall. That sound was closure, as if the echo of all that had been silenced finally had an answer. I didn't wait to see if anyone else was coming. I didn't want witnesses. This wasn't a movie scene, it was an intimate act between me and my dignity. I came home, my hands cold but my chest warm. Something in me had changed, as if I'd finally believed what so many told me, that I deserved to decide, that not everything has to be given, not everything has to be conditional love. I entered, took off my boots, hung my coat, and made a cup of coffee, the strong one, the one I only drink when I need to wake my soul. I sat by the window and watched the snow fall, white, silent, unstoppable. I thought of Caroline, how she'd react to receiving the letter. She might cry, scream, ignore it immediately. I didn't know. And for the first time, I didn't care, because what I'd sent wasn't a threat, it was a limit. And if someone needs explanations to understand why a mother stops paying for a life, they never understood the love given. 3 days after sending the letter, the phone rang. I knew before looking at the screen. It was her. I answered, not because I wanted to talk, but because I was no longer afraid of what she might say. "What is this, Mom?" Caroline shouted without greeting or preamble. "Are you punishing me? Is this some kind of revenge for what happened at the airport?" I could hear her voice break, trying to keep that sweet tone, but it didn't work because this time she didn't have control. This time, she wasn't the one cutting the thread. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes for a second. "You made your priorities clear at Christmas," I said softly, without drama. "Now I'm making mine clear." A silence, long, heavy, icy. "Just like that?" "Yes. And now you'll have to do what adults do." She gave a dry laugh, more fear than mockery. "You can't do this. Not to your daughter." "I'm not your ATM, Caroline." Another silence, different, as if it was hard to process that I no longer had anywhere to hide. "It's not about money," she said finally, weaker. "It's about family. You're leaving me alone." "Alone," I repeated, without sarcasm or resentment. "Caroline, you left me standing in an airport with a homemade pie and no place to go. And not by forgetfulness, but by decision. I'm not doing anything you haven't done first." I heard her labored breathing, like a child caught in a lie. It wasn't personal. Of course it was. The line stayed silent, and then, without saying goodbye, I hung up, not with anger, not in a hurry, just hung up, like closing a door that no longer leads to a safe place. I put the phone in the dresser drawer, where I keep old keys and ancient secrets. I poured myself a lavender tea and sat by the window. Outside, the snow kept falling, and inside, the trembling was no longer fear, it was relief. Because at last, after years of giving in, explaining myself, paying for affections, I said no. I said enough. And most importantly, I believed it. 2 days after that call, everything changed. I was checking recipes in my old notebook, the one with my grandmother's formulas, when a notification rang in my email. Sender, Lily Turner. Subject, "Are you okay, Grandma?" My heart stopped. I opened the message with trembling hands, as if opening a window to a past I wasn't sure I wanted to see. "Hello, Grandma. It's me, Lily. Mom said you didn't come for Christmas because you were sick. But you didn't seem sick in your messages. Is it true? Are you better? Max asks about you too. We miss you so much." The words were simple, but each was like a stone falling into the still pond where Caroline had hidden her lie. I sat still for a while, fingers on the keyboard, not knowing whether to respond, because the wounded mother in me wanted to protect my granddaughter from everything. But the woman who no longer stays silent knew hiding the truth only perpetuates the cycle. So I wrote, "Hello, my love. Thank you for writing. I wasn't sick. I just left because I didn't feel invited this time." Sometimes adults do things that are hard to understand, even for other adults. But I want you to know I love you and Max so much, and I'm fine. I hope to see you soon. Nothing more, no resentment, no accusation, just truth spoken with love. When I pressed send, I felt something open inside me, like a seed thrown to the wind. I didn't know where it would fall, but it was no longer my burden. It was the first step for the children to know who I really am, not the sick grandmother, not the forgotten one, but the present, real one. Later, while watering my plants, I thought about how Caroline had lied to her children without blinking. She did it out of embarrassment, not wanting to admit she'd left her mother at an airport, or because it was easier to erase than explain. I don't know. Maybe I'll never know, but I do know children feel. They see what adults think goes unnoticed, and when the truth comes suddenly, it hurts more because they were never allowed to ask. That night, I slept peacefully, not because everything was fixed, but because someone had finally asked about me with true love. And that changes everything. It was just another Friday, if such a thing exists when a truth has been released. I was sorting the pantry, labeling jars as always, flour, rice, lentils, when my phone rang with an alert from the family WhatsApp group, Turner Family Updates. Ironic, because for months, no one included me in anything beyond birthday photos or prayer chains no one read. But this time, it was different. A series of messages, all from Lily. First, a photo, a screenshot of my email, the one I wrote with so much care, with so much love, and without lies. Then, an innocent, brutally honest comment. Mom said Grandma didn't come because she was sick, but Grandma said they didn't invite her. What's the truth? Silence. A digital abyss that lasted long enough for me to feel something breaking on the other side of the city. The next to write was Ben. What's going on, Caroline? Followed by Ben's sister, who rarely says anything. You really didn't invite her and told the kids she was sick? I didn't write anything. I didn't have to. The next was an audio notification, 40 seconds. Caroline, with a trembling, choppy voice, it wasn't like that. It's not what you think. Everything was confusing. Mom said she'd come, but then changed her mind, and the kids had a fever. We didn't know if it was a good idea for her to come. I didn't lie. I just protected. Ben was sharp. Protected who? Us or yourself. And then, like throwing the last stone, you hung up on her. And now I understand everything. The group fell silent, a silence not even the most animated emoji could break. Later, I learned Caroline got up from the family dinner and locked herself in her room, leaving the table half cleared. Ben sat frozen, saying nothing more. Lily cried, not out of anger, but confusion, because when children discover adults lie, they don't understand the logic, they just feel the pain. I lifted the tablecloth in my dining room, arranged the tulips in the vase, and lit a candle, not for celebration, but respect, because truth, when it comes to light, deserves its space. And after so much invisibility, one sincere message was enough for them to finally see me. The office was small, with beige walls and a pendulum clock marking each second like a sentence. I sat on the left side. Caroline arrived later, with Ben at her side, though he didn't say a word throughout the session, more witness than husband. The mediator, a bald man with a slow voice, asked for respect and clarity, but he didn't know what was coming. Caroline spoke first, her voice fragile, between hurt and angry. Mom, I don't understand why you're doing this. Do you really want to take our house away? I breathed deeply. The tablecloth in my bag had a seam I started to smooth without thinking, an old gesture that calms me. I'm not taking anything from you, Caroline. I just stopped paying for something that isn't appropriate. But it's our house, she said, raising her voice. Our children have grown up there. You can't just disappear. I looked up, not to argue, but to set limits. And I didn't disappear for you at Christmas. The mediator tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand. I didn't need protection. I needed to be heard. You left me at an airport, Caroline. You told me to go back alone while you were already at the table. And now you want to talk about abandonment. She closed her eyes, covered her face for a second, but didn't apologize. I didn't think you'd take it so seriously. It's not what you did that day. It's what it means, I said without raising my voice. That you no longer see me as a person, but as a wallet, a nanny, a function. There was such thick silence that even the mediator lowered his gaze. I am your mother, Caroline, not your pension plan. She leaned back in the chair, wanted to speak, but no words came. Then she said, You owe me, Mom. Everything you've done for me, you didn't give freely. You always remind me. This is your punishment. I looked at her with sadness, not anger. Do you really think I'm punishing you? I said, No, daughter, this isn't punishment, it's consequence. And that's what happens when you forget that even mothers get tired. I saw her break, not in repentance, but in loss of control. She cried, not for what she did, but because she could no longer use me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't get up to comfort her, because that was also me, the one who no longer kneels so others can sit high. March 1st arrived with a gray sky and biting wind. I sat in the kitchen with my cup of tea and the radio on, waiting for something I knew was coming. The bank's formal notice arrived at 10:15 sharp. Notice of default mortgage. There it was, black on white, no embellishments. Caroline hadn't made a single payment since the notification arrived in early January, 2 months of warning, 2 months to take responsibility, 2 months to at least try. She didn't. By trust clause, the property automatically reverted to my name. I saved the document in the blue folder, the one that started it all, and stood looking out the window, watching the wind drag winter's last leaves. I felt no pleasure, no immediate relief, just reality. That house, a symbol of all I gave without measure, returned to me not by whim, but by law, by decision, by consequence. I received no call that day, not a message, just the silence she used so much against me, returned like a boomerang. Ben wrote 3 days later, a brief email. I know this wasn't easy for you. I just want you to know the kids are fine, and somehow this had to happen. I replied with gratitude, not because he forgave me anything, I hadn't failed, but because he recognized me as more than a figure in the background of the family painting. Caroline? Nothing, not a word, not an apology, not a reproach. Total silence. Sometimes silence is punishment, other times it's relief. A week later, I went to the bank and signed the papers. The house was no longer hers, it was mine again. If she wanted to stay, she'd have to refinance with her own means, her own name. I felt strong, not powerful, but strong, like someone finally closing a chapter without tearing the pages. That night, I poured a glass of white wine, the expensive one, saved for visits that never came. To limits, I toasted in a low voice, because protecting myself is also a way of loving. Caroline hasn't called since the bank letter. Weeks have passed, no messages, no reproaches, just an echo. Not empty, but silent, different from before. This one doesn't hurt anymore. It just confirms I made the right decision. Lily, on the other hand, writes every Sunday, sometimes by email, sometimes by video. She tells me about her chores, how Max is learning to play the guitar. She even asked me to teach her my oatmeal cookie recipe. She visits every other weekend. The first time, she brought a picture of me she printed for her room. She said she missed me, and I believed her because her eyes still hold space for clean love. When I saw her run through the garden, I knew what was lost wasn't everything. There was still something pure, something to keep sewing for. Helen came to lunch a few days ago, bringing her outrageous laughter and a bottle of cheap wine. You set limits, sister, she said, smoothing the tablecloth. You look so good. Even your hair's brighter. I laughed. Maybe so. Maybe that shine isn't from the hair, but from a soul that finally sleeps peacefully. I don't miss Caroline as she is now. I miss the girl. She was the one who hugged me from behind while I cooked, who left notes in my bag with badly drawn hearts. But that girl isn't here. And the woman left didn't know how to care for what she had. I can't live in mourning for what doesn't return. That afternoon, after planting tulips, I stood watching the garden. I thought of George, of all we gave, all I silenced, and all I finally said. Some loves dry up, but others bloom late, like me. It took 72 years to learn it, but I finally understood there's no spring without winter.